Hi, my name is Janna Goebel. I'm a doctoral candidate of Educational Policy and Evaluation in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. Thank you for this opportunity to participate virtually in the CIES conference. I can't think of a better time than right now, this moment, to discuss education beyond the human, when this conference has been disrupted so completely and so thoroughly by a virus. It's really our time to start thinking about what that all means for education and to start looking beyond the human very seriously. So my research is called What Matters in Education Beyond the Human, and it is based on the notion that the sustainability crisis that we're currently facing is born from the misconception that humans are separate from and in control over nature. So in response to that, I try and move forward past an anthropocentric model of education to allow for remaking Earth's narrative as becoming with the more than human world. So how can we see education and being and becoming as something more than just a binary distinction between humans and nature? How can we really engage in storying the world together, and how do we interact with our more than human narrators? The purpose of this study is to break the mold of the status quo, which are the binary distinctions between human and other, or human and nature. The more that we can see that we are always already nature, the more we understand that when we harm nature, we harm ourselves. And these aren't new ideas. This has been part of indigenous knowledge for ages. But in this study, I try and break the mold of those binary distinctions between human and nature, and between education and what happens outside of schools. So this study tries to see how education is something other than just learning, and how learning itself is becoming with the world, and becoming with more than human others, how it's a multi-species becoming, and how that becoming is storying the world. The main questions that guide this project are: how can researchers transcend our own human condition to see beyond an anthropocentric model of education? And when we do that, what do we see about what matters in education beyond the human? And when I ask what matters in education beyond the human, I don't just mean what's important. I mean, what are the matters? What are the multi-mattered, multi-species interactions and encounters that are making the world? This work takes an innovative approach to framing education as learning through becoming with, which I'm referring to as story worlding. So story worlding is something that I'm introducing in this dissertation, which includes symbiotic making of the Earth's narrative by including multi-species, multi-mattered narrators. Story worlding demonstrates how education beyond the human is in fact learning through symbiosis as co-authors of an earthly narrative, and it tries to incorporate those voices that have been the ghostwriters of Earth's narrative up until now. So this conceptual framework that I'm using is what I'm calling a nature-culture approach. Nature-culture comes from a common worlding approach, or Donna Haraway's concept of nature-culture. And in a nature-culture approach, it's impossible to disconnect the human from nature. So I am the water, and the water is me. I am the river, and the river is me. I can't disconnect myself from nature in this approach. And I do the same with education. So education is not just something formal that happens in schools, or something non-formal that happens outside of schools. Education is always becoming with the world. Learning is becoming with, and that's how I approach education in this study. When I first conceptualized the study, I didn't necessarily see things that way. So this study's methodological approach was a multi-species, multi-mattered ethnography, where I went to southeastern Brazil over the course of 6 months, so in 2 different winters in Brazil. And I lived and worked with 3rd, 4th, and 5th generation coffee farmers on family-owned plantations in southeastern Brazil. I also spent some time in a schoolhouse that served 9 children, ages 3 to 10. And I volunteered with the students there and was almost like a preschool teacher with the students there. And the idea of doing this research on the coffee plantations and in the schoolhouse was, one, to go find idyllic pure nature in Brazil, in coffee and nature, and 2, to see the difference of what children learn inside of school and outside of school. And the more that I engaged deeply with this theoretical approach and with this methodological approach, I saw how interconnected the two are and how I could not separate them or bifurcate them in any way. So this study actually takes place with multi-species, multi-mattered participants of multi-generations. The plants are over 100 years old, or some are just seedlings. The children are young, but I also have grandparents as participants. So this is a multi-generational study with multi-species participants. Data generation included walking conversations with children, adults in the more than human world, school participation in the one-room schoolhouse, art and things of importance. So the children and I would draw during school, or the teacher would draw during school, and all of these drawings went into a book that we kept, and it was our book. We also have audio and visual recordings in this study. The children and adults had access to a shared digital camera and to a voice recorder, and they knew that they could take them at any time and record anything that they wished. So I would record sounds at night. The dogs would always bark at 11:30 at night, and I wondered why, and I would record this sound. Or the children would ask, may I take the camera? And they'd run around their worlds and take photos. And these thousands of photos and these sound clips, they make our story. I also have reflections and musings and field notes in this study. And all of this data is part of a diffractive analysis. So I use Barad's concept of diffraction as a methodological tool and a way to stay with and listen to what the data wants and needs. So in this study, the data is agential, and we are becoming together with the data. Every day I walked from where I was living to the one-room schoolhouse, and it was a 5-kilometer walk. And on that walk, I would become with what was around me. I would observe what the ants were doing and be with the ants. I watched as the leaves swayed in the breeze, and I paid attention to what the birds did and how we walked together and flew together. The butterflies would surround me on this walk, which seems very idyllic, but it's true. One day I was walking and I thought, I am so tired. Is there any world in which I'm not this tired? And a large butterfly flew over my shoulder and flew off into the distance. And I thought, what if? What if I had followed that butterfly? Where would it have led me? And that's not to say it would have led me to some beautiful magical underworld somewhere else. But what if I had followed it? Is there another path and another universe? And so I would ask myself these questions on these walks. And when I was with the children and the adults at the one-room schoolhouse, I would ask myself, what is beyond this? If I'm here now, what is beyond? And how can I get there? And how do we all get there? How can we transcend our human condition to see beyond? Now in this diffractive analysis, we can see how the data moves us in different directions. And so in order to do that, I've taken a traditional approach to data analysis where I look at it thematically, but then I take those themes and I break them down, kind of as in the process of compost. They start as something very structured. For example, fire is a theme. They used fire to burn trash in this area, and we sucked down smoke every day in the school while they burned their trash. So fire is part of this study. Death and dying is a theme that came out of this study. The children would take my camera and take pictures of what they called interesting, which were animals or like chickens and cats. And then a week later, the cat would die, or a snake killed the cat, or the chickens died because a wild cat came and killed them. So death and dying were very present here. It's easy to see in this study how we are interconnected with fire and how humans are a part of the destruction of the earth with fire. It's easy to see in this study how children are interacting with animals, such as cats and chickens. But to see beyond that, we break down that structure even further to see the mess that lies in the entanglement. So what I've done in this dissertation is to take something and look at it thematically, but then to break down that structure as if it were compost across time to see what emerges from the data as we look across the breakdown. And what I've done is written a story that is based on data from this study, but imagines different possibilities. So the story I'll read to you now was based on data and looks beyond the human. The tree didn't know it would become a candle. For nearly 140 years, it had been a tree and done tree things. When the toucan needed to see what was happening in the canyon, the tree lent its branches as a perch. When the trash fires burned just up the road, the tree's leaves purified the air. As the plastic bottles discarded at its feet slowly leached their chemicals into the earth, the tree gathered these toxins into its trunk and kept the ants safe. The tree did not notice that its oldest branches had become rigid, but the moth had noticed. On this night, after the rain had cleared the smoke from the air and washed it into the river, the moth, as one of the keepers of night stories, fluttered its wings and signaled to the moon that the time had come. The rays of the moon shone down onto the tree's white flowers that were now round candles, which were years in the making, and tonight brand new.